The sound of tires crunched against loose gravel, breaking the otherwise peaceful silence of a balmy evening in Charlotte, North Carolina. Julian Coleman, a well-respected 48-year-old man known for his composed demeanor and steadfast leadership, turned onto Sycamore Avenue, the pale glow of street lamps lining the quiet suburban streets shimmering in the dusk. He had just concluded a long but fulfilling day, engaging with local community leaders in discussions meant to strengthen ties and build trust with the police department he had recently been appointed to lead. Peeking through the window of his modest black sedan, Julian took in the familiar sights of his neighborhood. Children playing on front lawns, couples strolling hand in hand, the faint scent of dinner wafting from homes that represented the fabric of his community. As his thoughts meandered toward the evening waiting for him at home, a delectable pot roast prepared by his wife Karen, he welcomed a sense of gratitude for the fulfilling life he had built. It was a life that had required perseverance, navigating through the complexities of community service, balancing law enforcement duties with compassionate engagement. As he turned into a quieter road lined with sycamore trees, however, his moment of serenity was abruptly shattered. Suddenly, blue and red lights sliced through his rearview mirror, flashing like a siren's call that jolted Julian from his contemplative state. A knot tightened in his stomach, uncharacteristic of his typically calm demeanor. He checked the speedometer, 29 miles per hour in a 35 zone, a lawful speed. There were no traffic violations to be found, all his lights were functioning perfectly. Still, the patrol car's siren wailed louder, compelling him to pull over, and he felt his heart rate quicken. "Stay calm," he muttered to himself, a mantra that grounded him in the face of potential adversity. Years of experience had taught him the drill. Keep hands visible, show movement slowly, maintain a polite demeanor, a routine not derived from wrongdoing, but from the realization that appearances often dictated outcomes in such situations. As he signaled to the side of the road, his pulse raced at the unexpected escalation about to unfold. When the officer approached, flashlight cutting through the dimly lit interior of Julian's car, Julian instinctively kept his hands on the steering wheel, displaying no signs of aggression. The beam of the flashlight tracked over his face, detailing the shock of graying hair at his temples, the gentle lines that framed his eyes, a reflection of a man who had dedicated himself to the service of others. "Evening, sir," the officer greeted, his tone laced with an air of suspicion. "You in a hurry tonight?" "No, sir," Julian replied, his voice steady and composed. "Just heading home." The officer's flashlight pierced deeper, searching every inch of the vehicle with a wide arc, lingering a moment too long on the dashboard, the passenger seat, and then finally landing back on Julian's face. "License and registration?" he ordered abruptly, ignoring the insinuation behind Julian's response. Julian fought the urge to raise an eyebrow at the sudden turn of aggression. "Of course, officer," he replied evenly, keeping his tone calm. "I'm getting my registration now and my license is in my wallet. I'll reach for it after this." As his fingers gracefully unlatched the glove compartment, he narrated every move, keenly aware that anything, no matter how minor, could be misconstrued as an act of defiance. "Here it is," he said as he retrieved the vehicle registration, handing it over with steady hands. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" the officer pressed, almost as if expecting a confession rather than an answer. Julian frowned slightly, reinforcing his steadiness. "I was told it was for reckless driving, which I categorically deny. My dash cam can verify my version of events." The officer cut him off sharply, his expression shifting from suspicion to determination. "Dash cam, huh? That'll be confiscated for evidence. Step out of the vehicle." Surprised by the sudden escalation, Julian's stomach turned, but he unbuckled his seat belt and opened the door slowly. "Is there a problem, officer?" "I'm complying fully with your request. Step out of the vehicle now." The officer's command had an edge that sent a chill down Julian's spine. Determined not to escalate the situation further, Julian raised his hands in clear view, revealing nothing but compliance. He was conscious of the second officer, a stocky man lingering near the rear bumper, his hand resting loosely on his holstered weapon, ready to intervene at any moment. The officer's jaw tightened as Julian stepped out, the chill of the evening air hitting him sharply. The cold metal of handcuffs dug into his wrists as he was pulled toward the patrol car. "Is this really necessary?" Julian asked, his voice measured but firm. "I haven't done anything wrong." "Resisting arrest, huh?" The first officer sneered, his tone mocking. "You want to play that game? Fine by me." Julian's mind raced. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it felt like a calculated act of profiling, plain and simple. As he was shoved into the back of the squad car, the realization sank deeper. Glancing out the window, he noticed a few of his neighbors peeking through their blinds, their silhouettes illuminated by the ambient glow of porch lights. No one stepped outside, but he felt a lingering resentment build within. This was far from over, and Julian wasn't planning to remain silent for long. The patrol car rattled slightly as it rolled down the street, Julian sitting stiffly in the back seat. He glanced out the window, familiar landmarks whizzing by, but his mind wasn't on the scenery, it was occupied by the absurdity of what just happened. The two officers sat in front, casual and chipper as they exchanged banter without a hint of concern for the man they had just detained. "So, what's your story? Late-night drug run, or you just like giving us a hard time?" Officer Daniels asked, glancing back through the rearview mirror. "I'm just trying to get home," Julian replied, his voice devoid of agitation. "Yeah, sure," the other officer, Reed, chimed in. "We hear that all the time. Reckless drivers always have an excuse." Feeling a tide of anger rise but choosing to hold back, Julian took deep breaths. He was not just a victim here. He was the police chief. A silent resolve began to form in his mind. He understood the system, and although the odds were stacked against him, he also understood that standing up would eventually lead to rectifying this injustice. When they arrived at the precinct, the fluorescent lights overhead cast a stark and unforgiving glow over the holding area. A mix of anxiety and impatience flooded through Julian as he was led into a small, cold holding cell. The door clanged shut behind him, echoing throughout the room. He sat on the metal bench, his thoughts a whirlpool as he replayed the events of the night. Years of dedicated work in law enforcement, building a career rooted in justice and fairness, now confronted him with a cruel twist, being subjected to the very abuse of power he had vowed to dismantle. Outside the cell, the two officers leaned against a desk, laughing quietly as they continued to review Julian's license and car registration, their expressions laden with mockery. "Nothing out of the ordinary," Daniels said, sounding almost disappointed, yet Reed countered with a cocky grin. "Doesn't matter. We'll find something. Guys like him always have skeletons in the closet." Julian overheard their exchanges, his expression unreadable as he remained seated with his hands clasped, steady in posture, refusing to succumb to anger. His reality blended into an unexpected landscape. He was one of the pillars intended to hold the police department accountable, yet he now stood at its mercy. Hours dragged by within the solitary confinement of the holding cell. Various officers drifted in and out, casting glances toward the man in the cell, each of them unaware that they were in the presence of the new police chief. Julian had transferred to this station only 3 weeks prior, and already the complexities of his new position were surfacing in startling clarity. Finally, just as dawn began to paint the sky with hues of orange and pink, the sound of footsteps approached his cell once more. Lieutenant Morgan, a high-ranking officer with an air of authority and professionalism that contrasted sharply with the two previous officers, appeared before him. She scrutinized the paperwork in her hand, then shifted her gaze to Julian, an expression of concern crossing her features. "What's going on here?" she demanded, cutting through the tension hanging thick in the air. "Picked him up last night for reckless driving and resisting arrest," Daniels reported, his tone casual, entirely unbothered by the predicament. Morgan arched an eyebrow. "Reckless driving? Where's the evidence?" "We haven't processed it yet," Reed shrugged dismissively while leaning against the desk. Morgan took a deep breath, obviously growing exasperated. "Get it now." "Daniels, Reed, my office. Now." Julian watched as the two officers exchanged bewildered glances before slinking away from his presence. The moment they left, Morgan turned her attention back to Julian, her expression softening slightly. "Sir, do you have any idea why you were stopped?" Julian stood, meeting her gaze with calm resolve. "I was told it was for reckless driving, which I categorically deny. I'm a law-abiding citizen, and I have a dash cam that can verify my version of events." Morgan's eyes narrowed thoughtfully as she absorbed his words. "You were just doing your job as a police chief, I take it?" "I did not wish to disclose my position during the stop because I wanted the truth to come out without any bias," Julian clarified, his voice even. Morgan nodded, appearing to respect his intent. "I will be reviewing all of this carefully, and I assure you, this should never have happened." Julian felt a flicker of hope. At least he had an ally now. As he left the holding area, the weight of the past night began to lift, but he knew that the fight for justice was far from over. Little did he know that the events from this ordinary evening would soon spiral into a far-reaching confrontation with systemic issues deeply embedded within the police force, one that would reshape not only his career but the lives of countless others in the community. The fog of injustice lay thick in the air, ripe for exposure and change, and Julian was determined to wield the torch for accountability, illuminating the darkness that had claimed too many before him. With resolve and clarity of purpose igniting within him, Julian stepped into the precinct, ready to face whatever challenges awaited. He was prepared not just to confront the police culture he had found but also to instill a new standard, a world where fairness, dignity, and accountability reigned supreme, where the balance of justice was restored not only for him but for every citizen he had pledged to serve. The early morning sun cast a warm glow on the precinct, illuminating the bustling corridors as officers moved with purpose, each focused on their assigned tasks. Lieutenant Morgan led Julian out of the holding area, escorting him to her office for a thorough review of the events that had transpired. As they walked, the air was filled with the hum of fluorescent lights and the murmur of hushed conversations. The atmosphere was thick with tension, a reminder that the events of the previous night had shaken the confidence of those who wore the badge. Upon entering Morgan's office, Julian was surprised by the warm and inviting decor, which contrasted sharply with the sterile atmosphere he had grown accustomed to in law enforcement. The lieutenant settled into her chair, inviting Julian to take a seat in front of her desk. "Chief Coleman," she began, her voice measured and professional. "I'm sorry for the events of last night. I know you were just doing your job, and I appreciate your dedication to upholding the law. However, I need to review the details and assess the situation." With Morgan's guidance, Julian recounted the events of his stop, from the initial pullover to the arrest and subsequent detention. As he spoke, she listened attentively, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "I apologize, Chief Coleman," Morgan continued. "It seems that we've got some issues with these officers. The evidence is lacking and their testimony appears to be sketchy at best. I'll be conducting a thorough investigation, but I want you to know that this wasn't an isolated incident. We've had complaints about these officers before, but nothing we could prove." Julian listened intently, his mind racing with the implications. He knew that he had stumbled into a much larger problem, one that went beyond a single incident or even a few rogue officers. This was about a systemic issue, a deep-seated rot that had infected the very fabric of the police department. "What can I do to help?" Julian asked, his voice firm with conviction. Morgan nodded, a hint of a smile on her face. "I need your input, Chief Coleman. Your perspective as a new officer will be invaluable in this investigation. I'll be working with the DA's office to review the evidence and build a case against these officers. I'd like you to meet with me again later today to discuss the details." With Morgan's words, a weight lifted off Julian's shoulders. He knew that he had a long and difficult road ahead, but with allies like Lieutenant Morgan, he felt a sense of hope that he hadn't felt in a long time. As the investigation began, Julian couldn't help but wonder about the officers who had arrested him. What had driven them to act with such blatant disregard for protocol and the law? The more he delved into the case, the more he began to suspect that there was more at play than a simple case of corruption. The hours passed and the sun continued its ascent, casting a warm glow over the precinct. Julian sat in his office, poring over the files and case notes, his mind racing with theories and scenarios. He knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was determined to see justice served. Just as he was about to leave for a meeting with Morgan, his phone buzzed with an incoming text from Karen. "Hey, how are you?" she asked, her words a welcome respite from the turmoil that had consumed him. "I'm doing okay, honey," Julian replied, a smile spreading across his face. "Just getting settled into the new job. I've got a lot on my plate, but I'll be home soon. Can't wait to see you." Karen's response was a string of loving emojis and a simple message. "I love you, Chief." Julian smiled, feeling a warmth in his heart that he hadn't felt in a long time. He knew that Karen was his rock, his partner in every sense of the word. Together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, side by side. With newfound determination, Julian left his office, ready to take on the day and fight for justice in the face of overwhelming odds. The battle may have been long and difficult, but with Morgan by his side and Karen's love to guide him, he knew that he could overcome anything. As he walked out of the precinct, the bright sunlight hit him like a slap in the face, a reminder of the bright horizon that lay ahead. Julian took a deep breath, feeling a sense of purpose wash over him. He was ready to take on the system, to fight for what was right, and to bring justice to those who had been wronged. The journey ahead would be long and arduous, but Julian Coleman was ready. He was a chief, a detective, and a man driven by a burning desire for justice. He would not rest until the truth was revealed, and those responsible for the corruption were held accountable. The battle for justice had begun, and Julian Coleman was ready to take on the fight of his life. The office buzzed with activity as Julian entered the meeting room where Lieutenant Morgan awaited him, flanked by two detectives, Rodriguez, a seasoned investigator with a sharp wit, and Webster, a fresh-faced rookie brimming with enthusiasm. The atmosphere was tense, and Julian could feel the weight of the investigation pressing down on everyone present. "Thank you for coming in, Chief," Morgan began, her voice steady and authoritative. "We need to discuss our strategy moving forward, especially regarding the officers involved in your arrest." Julian took a seat at the long, polished table, glancing at the array of files and documents spread out before him, each one representing a thread of evidence yet to be unraveled. "What have you gathered so far?" he asked, leaning forward. Rodriguez, flipping through files, responded. "We've been tracking complaints against Officers Daniels and Reed for over a year. Allegations range from excessive use of force to racial profiling. Unfortunately, there has been little cooperation from fellow officers during previous investigations, and their actions often go unreported." Julian's heart sank at the realization that these officers had seemingly operated with impunity. "How did I not know about this before?" he pondered aloud, visibly frustrated. "Because it's the norm," Webster chimed in, his youthful optimism contrasting sharply with the grim reality of the investigation. "Too many people are afraid of retaliation or disbelief. We need to change that culture." Morgan nodded in agreement. "Indeed. We need a crystal-clear directive from the top to initiate a comprehensive review of these officers' activities. If we can gather enough evidence to confirm a pattern of behavior, we can take solid disciplinary action." With that, the meeting focused on developing a plan, interviewing previous complainants, reviewing body cam footage and gathering witness statements that might corroborate Julian's experience. As they worked tirelessly, Julian felt a sense of camaraderie building among the team. They were all in this together, united by a common goal, to instill change, to demand accountability, and to restore faith in law enforcement. Amid the barrage of paperwork and discussions about procedural missteps, he found an unexpected solace in the collaborative effort, finding purpose in a system that had, until now, cast its shadow over his commitment to justice. Several days passed as the investigation unfolded. Each day Julian visited the station, poring over evidence, meeting complainants and watching the shift in dynamics as word spread. Change was coming. The officers who had once felt untouchable were now on high alert, and whispers of fear began to circulate through their ranks. With the help of Rodriguez and Morgan, Julian began to piece together a troubling narrative. They uncovered a troubling trend. Daniels and Reed often resorted to aggressive tactics during traffic stops in historically marginalized areas of the city, creating a significant divide between law enforcement and the community. The more they dug, the more they realized the weight of the systemic issues they were confronting was far deeper than either of them had expected. One afternoon, Julian sat in a crowded conference room, flipping through a file. Inside he found a letter from a resident named James Morris, a first-hand account of an encounter that had escalated into violence. It was filled with raw emotions, detailing how Daniels had pulled him over under false pretenses, leading to an arrest that threatened to upend James' life. "Get this to the DA," Julian said, eyes blazing with determination. "This could be the break we need." Days turned into weeks, and the investigation slowly transformed into a public discourse. Julian stood alongside Morgan at community meetings, addressing the citizens, demanding their voices be heard and encouraging them to come forward. Each testimony fueled the fire, igniting a sense of solidarity among residents who believed in the possibility of change. Finally, the day came when they were ready to present their findings formally. Morgan, Julian, Rodriguez, Webster, and the DA convened at the City Hall. News crews and community members filled the seats, eager to hear about the findings. Julian took a deep breath, his hands resting firmly on the podium. "Thank you for being here today. I stand before you not just as the police chief but as a fellow citizen who believes in justice for all." As he laid out the evidence they had collected, the documented patterns of misconduct, the testimonies from victims, and the comprehensive data illustrating the racial disparities in the officers' actions, he could feel the room shifting. Eyes widened and murmurs rippled through the audience. "And it is with this evidence that we can no longer allow these rogue officers to remain unchecked. Daniels and Reed will face disciplinary action, and I vow to establish a community policing initiative designed to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the very people we are sworn to protect." The room erupted in applause, and the atmosphere shifted again, no longer just a moment of despair but a beacon of hope. Julian could see the faces of his community members light up, gratitude replacing fear. In the wake of Julian's speech, the community rallied around the police department, frosty relationships thawing as hope blossomed. The public outcry and solid evidence led to immediate suspensions for Daniels and Reed, as well as an independent review of the precinct's practices.